Snow drifted gently outside the crystal windows of Castle of Friendship, while inside, the main six were buried in the yearly chaos humans insist on calling holiday spirit, which mostly seemed to involve glitter explosions and baked goods with enough sugar to stop a yak's heart. Twilight Sparkle was organizing presents by size, color, and emotional significance. Pinkie Pie had somehow wrapped herself into a gift box again. Rainbow Dash was hanging upside down from a garland she swore she could totally fix. Meanwhile, Fluttershy quietly helped little woodland critters decorate cookies while pretending not to notice Angel Bunny stealing frosting with the determination of a hardened criminal. Near the massive hearth-warming tree, the princesses talked softly together. Princess Celestia smiled warmly. "It feels peaceful this year." The universe immediately took that as a challenge. A loud "Voom!" A glowing portal ripped open in the middle of the throne room, crackling blue light across the crystal floor. Every pony jumped back. "Incoming!" a human voice yelled. A brown-haired teenage boy came tumbling out of the portal, face first into a pile of wrapped presents. Silence. Then a muffled voice from inside the wrapping paper groaned. "I landed on a candy cane. How is that physically painful?" Applejack blinked. "Well, shoot, it's Edward." The boy pushed himself upright, fair-skinned, messy-haired, wearing a winter jacket dusted with snow from whatever world he'd just crash-landed through. The second Rainbow Dash recognized him, she tackled him into a hug hard enough to nearly send both through another dimension. "Edward!" "Oxygen," Edward croaked. "Tiny issue. Need some." She grinned and helped him up anyway. The Cutie Mark Crusaders burst into the room like tiny, caffeinated missiles. "Edward's back!" shouted Apple Bloom. Sweetie Belle nearly tripped over a ribbon running toward him, while Scootaloo launched herself at his waist like a heat-seeking foal missile. Edward laughed, kneeling to hug them all at once. "There are my goblins." "We are not goblins," Sweetie Belle protested. "You ate pine cones last winter." "That was one time." Princess Celestia approached with a soft smile, followed beside by Princess Luna. "You returned just in time for Hearth's warming eve," Celestia said. Edward rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. The portal coordinates were mostly intentional. Twilight's eye twitched. "Mostly?" "A percentage." "A number, Edward." 20? Twilight inhaled sharply like she was about to write a 50-page safety lecture on interdimensional travel. Civilization itself hanging by a thread, as usual. Before she could start, Pinkie Pie suddenly gasped so loudly every pony froze. "You haven't opened your presents yet!" Within seconds, Edward was dragged onto a couch under a mountain of gifts and blankets. The fillies piled beside him, while Rainbow Dash sprawled upside down over the backrest. Outside, snow continued falling over Ponyville. Inside the castle, laughter, warm lights, and the smell of cinnamon filled the air as Edward settled back into the strange little world that somehow treated him like family. And honestly, for one night, the universe decided not to ruin it. Miracles do happen. The warm laughter from the castle faded behind Edward as he trudged through the snow toward Sweet Apple Acres, boots crunching against thick ice. The blizzard had picked up fast, wind howling through the barren trees, hard enough to make branches creak like old bones. He pulled his coat tighter, Just grabbing the tree, he muttered. Normal Christmas activity. Totally not how horror movies start every single time. Snow whipped across his face as he walked deeper into the orchard. Then he saw it, a streak of red against the white snow. Edward froze. Blood. Fresh. His stomach tightened immediately. The trail dragged through the orchard toward the deeper woods, smeared unevenly like something heavy had been pulled. The wind screamed louder. Edward should have turned back. Any sane person would have turned back. Humans, unfortunately, are powered almost entirely by terrible curiosity. "Hello?" he called weakly. No answer. Only the blizzard. He followed the trail between the trees, breathing shakily now. The smell hit him first. Metallic. Rotting. Wrong. Then lightning flashed across the storm clouds, and he saw it. A tree stood crooked in the snow, or something pretending to be a tree. Edward's scream tore out before he could stop it. A pony's mutilated body had been fused into the trunk, flesh and bark twisted together grotesquely. Torn limbs hung at impossible angles from broken branches. Feathers from shredded wings fluttered weakly in the wind, frozen solid with blood. The head was embedded in the center of the trunk. Its jaw hung stretched unnaturally wide, far beyond what any living thing should allow, like it had been violently pulled apart and snapped back wrong. The eyes bulged outward from the sockets, frozen in terror. Edward stumbled backward violently and crashed into the snow. He gagged hard, nearly vomiting. "No, no, no, no!" His breathing became sharp, panicked gasps as he scrambled backward on his elbows, unable to stop staring at the thing. The storm suddenly went quiet. Not silent, quiet, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then came a creak, slow, heavy. Edward's eyes lifted upward. The branches above him were moving, not from the wind. Something large shifted within the trees overhead, hidden by snow and darkness. A wet, cracking noise echoed through the orchard. Edward's face went pale, and somewhere deeper in the blizzard, something let out a low, warped sound that almost resembled a pony trying to laugh. The severed head hit the snow with a wet thump and rolled to a stop inches from Edward's boots. For one horrible second, it just stared at him. Then the jaw cracked wider. Sharp, uneven teeth burst from its mouth with sickening pops, row after row, forcing their way through torn gums. From the ragged neck stump, long spider-like legs unfolded outward, twitching violently against the snow. The thing screeched, not like an animal, like dozens of voices crying at once through broken glass. Edward shouted in terror and grabbed the creature instinctively before it could bite him, hurling it across the orchard. It slammed into a tree trunk with a crack. He didn't wait. Edward bolted through the blizzard, slipping through deep snow as branches clawed at his coat. His lungs burned. Behind him, he heard the frantic clicking of spider legs skittering across ice. Nope! 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 Ahead, An old wooden apple barrel sat beside a storage shed half buried in snow. Edward dove inside and yanked the lid shut over himself, curling into the cramped darkness while trying not to hyperventilate. The barrel smelled like rotten apples and wet wood, still better than being devoured by nightmare firewood. Outside, silence. Only wind. Edward shook violently, clutching his switchblade knife. Then, thunk. Something landed on top of the barrel. Edward froze. Slowly, a horrible, wet breathing sound rasped above him. Saliva dripped through the cracks in the wood onto his jacket. Edward covered his mouth to stop himself from making noise. Then came the scraping. The creature's teeth slowly pushed through the barrel lid. Tiny splinters rained onto Edward's hair. It was chewing through the wood, trying to eat the barrel, trying to eat him. Panic exploded through Edward's chest. The teeth punched through inches from his face, and he screamed, jamming the switchblade upward with both hands. The blade sank into flesh. The creature shrieked so loudly the barrel rattled. It tumbled off into the snow outside, screeching in pain before darting back into the storm. Edward sat frozen for several seconds, trembling violently. Then he shoved the lid open and climbed out into the blizzard. Big mistake. Humanity's favorite hobby. The creature launched from the darkness immediately. It slammed into Edward's chest and knocked him flat into the snow. The severed head writhed across him, more spider limbs bursting grotesquely from torn flesh as it snapped its jaws inches from his face. Edward screamed and grabbed it by the throat stump with one hand. With the other, he stabbed. Again, 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 again. The blade plunged repeatedly into the creature's distorted mouth and eye socket, while black blood sprayed across the snow. The thing shrieked and thrashed wildly, its spider limbs stabbing into the ground around him. Edward kept stabbing in blind terror until finally the creature twitched violently and went still. Only the storm remained. Edward crawled backward through the snow, breathing hard, staring at the ruined thing in horror, while blood dripped from the knife in his shaking hand. Edward crawled through the snow on trembling arms, barely conscious. The blizzard buried his trail almost instantly behind him, while black blood soaked his clothes and smeared across the white ground beneath him. His hands shook so badly he could barely pull himself forward anymore. Every breath burned. Every sound in the woods made him flinch. Somewhere out there, more of those things might still be moving through the storm. The warm lights of Sweet Apple Acres finally appeared through the snowfall like a lifeline. Edward reached the porch steps of the farmhouse and collapsed against them weakly. The severed head of the creature lay several feet behind him in the snow, where he had dragged it unknowingly during his escape. Its spider limbs twitched occasionally, like dying nerves. Edward's vision blurred. Then darkness started pulling him under. At that same moment, the farmhouse door burst open. "Edward!" shouted Applejack. Beside her, Applebloom gasped in horror. Edward was sprawled half dead in the snow, covered in black blood, cuts, and frozen slush. Applebloom ran toward him immediately. "Edward!" Then she noticed the thing behind him. the head. Its swollen flesh was beginning to bloat grotesquely, black veins pulsing beneath stretched skin. Applejack's ears pinned back. What in tarnation? The head suddenly made a wet, boiling noise. Blisters formed rapidly across its flesh. Then, pop! The creature exploded like an overfilled tick. Black blood and chunks of rotten flesh blasted across the snow, porch, trees, and all three of them. Apple Bloom screamed. Applejack physically recoiled in disgust. Sweet Celestia! The smell hit a second later. Absolute biological warfare. Some horrors transcend dimensions and basic hygiene. The spider limbs writhed briefly in the snow before finally going limp. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Apple Bloom hurried to Edward's side, tears forming in her eyes. He's freezing! Edward barely managed a weak mumble. Found the wrong Christmas tree. Then he passed out completely. Applejack immediately lowered herself. Together, she and Apple Bloom carefully lifted Edward onto her back. The farmhouse lights disappeared behind them as they pushed into the blizzard toward Castle of Friendship. Snow whipped around them violently, and deep within the dark orchard behind the house, several pairs of pale eyes slowly opened between the trees. Inside Castle of Friendship, the atmosphere had been warm and peaceful only moments earlier. The fire crackled softly. Snow tapped against the crystal windows. Pinkie Pie was halfway through telling a ridiculous story involving gingerbread cookies and a trombone when the castle doors suddenly slammed open, hard enough to shake the room. Every pony jumped. Freezing wind roared inside. Standing in the doorway were Applejack and Apple Bloom. Both were covered in snow and black blood. The room went dead silent. Edward hung unconscious across Applejack's back, limp and pale, his clothes soaked with frozen blood and deep scratches. The apple cider mugs slowly lowered around the room. Twilight Sparkle immediately stood up. What happened? Fluttershy gasped quietly at Edward's condition, ears flattening in fear. Rainbow Dash shot into the air instantly. Who did this to him? Apple Bloom looked shaken to the core. We found him outside, she whispered. Near the orchard. Princess Celestia stepped forward slowly, her expression darkening the moment she saw the black blood coating Edward's jacket. That is not normal blood, she said quietly. No kiddin', Applejack muttered, exhausted. There was something out there. Scootaloo stared in horror at Edward's torn sleeves. Is he dead? Rainbow Dash immediately snapped. No! The sharpness in her voice made Scootaloo flinch. Rainbow landed beside Edward, panic written all over her face as she gently shook him. Edward! Hey! Wake up! No response. Only weak breathing. Princess Luna approached next, eyes narrowing as she examined the black stains. Then her gaze slowly lifted toward the storm outside. I feel dark magic, she said grimly. That sentence alone sucked every ounce of warmth from the room. Even Pinkie Pie stopped smiling, because when the immortal Moon Princess says dark magic, that usually means every pony's about to have an extremely bad week. Applejack carefully lowered Edward onto a couch near the fire, while Twilight immediately wrapped blankets around him using magic. As the heat touched him, Edward finally stirred weakly. His eyes opened halfway. For a second he looked confused, then terrified. He grabbed Twilight's foreleg suddenly with trembling hands. "There's something in the orchard," he rasped. The entire room listened silently. Edward's voice shook badly. "It wore a pony's face." Princess Celestia didn't waste another second. The moment Edward described the creature, she turned sharply and galloped deeper into Castle of Friendship. "Celestia," Twilight Sparkle called after her, "I need the restricted archives, now!" That sentence alone made Twilight's blood run cold. The others remained near Edward while Celestia disappeared into the castle library tower. Massive shelves stretched endlessly upward, packed with ancient tomes, forbidden histories, and magical records older than some civilizations. Dust swirled through the air as Celestia's horn ignited gold. Books flew from shelves rapidly around her. Page after page flipped through the air at impossible speed. Parasitic entities? Corpse magic? Winter spirits, she muttered. Nothing matched. Then one ancient black-covered book suddenly stopped mid-air. Its chains rattled softly. Celestia's expression hardened immediately. "Oh no." The title was faded almost beyond reading. Creatures Banished Beyond the Frozen North. The pages flipped violently under her magic until she stopped at an illustration. A pony's severed head. Spider limbs erupting from the neck. Rows of needle-like teeth. Celestia stared silently for several seconds. Then she read aloud quietly. "The Crawling Maw." Back in the main room, every pony fell silent, hearing the name echo through the crystal halls. Celestia returned, carrying the ancient book in her magic aura. The firelight illuminated the horrifying sketch for every pony to see. Fluttershy immediately covered her mouth in horror. "That's it," Edward whispered weakly from the couch. "That's what attacked me." Celestia nodded grimly. "The crawling maws are ancient scavenger predators corrupted by dark magic long ago." She continued reading carefully. "They infest frozen forests and feed upon fear, flesh, and living magic. They often use the remains of ponies to lure prey closer before separating the head from the body." Apple Bloom looked sick. Rainbow Dash's wings flared angrily. "I'm gonna pulverize those freaks!" "Thou shalt not rush blindly into darkness," warned Princess Luna. Celestia kept reading. "When threatened, a crawling maw may rupture its body in order to spread corrupted blood onto nearby prey or terrain. Any forest heavily infected may eventually become a nesting ground." Twilight's eyes widened. "Sweet Celestia." Edward slowly sat up despite the blankets. "There were more," he said quietly. "I heard them in the woods." The fire crackled softly. Outside, the blizzard battered the castle windows harder than before. Then came a distant sound from somewhere beyond Ponyville. A screech, followed by another, and another.